Hello. Hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hi, sorry.
Hi, Representative Walker.
Hi, guys. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Good afternoon.
It's just a long week. Long week. Are the chairs on? Greg or May on?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, well, do we want to start?
Let's start.
Yeah,
Oh, here comes Greg. Hold on.
okay. Here's Greg. There he is. Hi, Greg. You're muted.
I'm on time. 1 o'clock. I think we close.
Okie dokie. It's your show, Greg. Go ahead.
Okay, well, we got a lot of people on this call, don't we? Good.
Yeah.
I guess we should identify the folks from UConn if you want to identify yourself first. And I understand you have a PowerPoint. It probably makes sense to go through that, but I just ask that you move through the PowerPoint as quickly as possible, leave as much time for questions as possible. We have 2 hours allocated. That's an hour more than we provided to the CSU system last week. So I'll give a little bit more latitude in the amount of time you devote to the PowerPoint. But you're covering both UConn and UConn Health. As I previewed the PowerPoint, it looked like a lot of your points are sort of the same for both sides of the budget. So that should provide enough of an efficiency to allow us to get through it in time for plenty of time for questions. But I don't know who to recognize. I guess maybe Mr. Gagan is the chief person from UConn. Why don't you introduce your team and go through the PowerPoint as quickly as possible as you can, but thoroughly, and then we'll ask questions afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that sounds like a great plan. So for everybody, Jeff Gagan, Chief Financial Officer for UConn and UConn Health. For introductions, next I'll turn it over to Ann DeLeva.
Hello, everyone. Ann DeLeva, Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs. Nice to see you today.
And then Nathan First.
Hey, everybody. Nathan First, Vice President for Enrollment Planning and Management.
Great, and thank you. And then Joanne, do we want to go through the rest of the team?
No, I think we're okay.
Okay, so
Let's
for
start.
hopefully, and we do have a lot of our team on also to be able to try to answer as many questions for you today here. And of course, if we need to get anything further additional information, we will always take that away and get that right back to you. So yeah, to follow the precedent set by Board of Regents and Ben, we'll kind of take the same aspect, go through the PowerPoint slides that was sent as quickly as possible, and then we'll jump right into questions. So Joanne, are you able to bring up the PowerPoint? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So again, from the questions, we have answered both for UConn Health where those questions were asked. So we try to get both of the information into the same deck for it. So the first one, we were just really asked about the positions and the position count that we had. So you'll see just on this slide, we did break it out between the state general fund, and then we have multiple non-state funds for our actual employees. So just for on the left-hand side for the university, for UConn, there's about 2,000 or there is 2,298 FTEs currently on the general fund. And that's about 46% of the employees. And then the right-hand side for UConn Health, the same thing. The first line is the state general fund, which is 1,855, or about 39% of our employees. So just of note on that one, though, we do fully utilize the general fund for salaries. So there is never any vacancies on the general fund. Employees are moved on or off throughout the year, but we do fully spend that. And just a note for, UConn Health, we have mentioned in a lot, we do have a number of vacant positions out, especially on the clinical side. But for coverage needs and for anything for staffing and overtime, those funds are actually moved and utilized for temp staff agency to make sure for our patient safety that we have that covered at all times. Next slide. So next, we're actually asked about some of our service contracts. So getting in this and getting the detail, we've actually have additional details we did provide to the committee in our submitted materials. So we just had some summaries here for it. So I think we went a little into the details for everybody just to give all of the spend. But for UConn, the total value for the annual cost related to the contracts is about $167 million. And then we took off the actual spend at UConn Health, and that spend is $107 million currently. So just the types of these contracts, we have numerous contracts all over, but they range from just custodial and landscaping services. So services directly related to the campus, and then all the way to, we do have security services for our clinical sites across the campus for just normal operations for those clinical sites. And then you can see in here is just some of the summaries that we built in. And again, there was a lot of additional information, but if there's any questions on those, we can always go into more detail as needed. Next slide. So next is just the revenues. Overall, the comments are made that state support actually accounts for approximately 26% of the revenues for both UConn and UConn Health. But for the rest of the breakout, we just put here in the simple pie graphs for all of the revenues for the combined entity is about $3.3 billion. So we have 1.7 at UConn and 1.6 billion at UConn Health. So the left-hand side is for the university. And you'll see at the bottom, we have the state support salary and then the state support fringe benefits, which gets us to the 26. But as we move around, the first three are really just student-related drivers for our revenues. So of course, tuition, which makes up about 30%. Then the student fees related is about 9%. And then auxiliary revenue is a number of items are in there, but one of the main drivers is our housing and dining programs, again, related to the students. So you take all three of those and we're at 51% just on that side for UConn. Then, of course, some of the others are the aspect of the grants and contracts really driven by our federal and research activities is about 17% for UConn. On the right-hand side for UConn Health, again, the main drivers, you can see right off the bat that net patient revenue is 48%. And that's related to all the clinical activities billed to patients for the hospital, the physician practice, and our dental clinics for UConn Health. Next, if we go around on the other revenue, that has a lot of different items in that one. But again, a main driver of other revenue is actually part of our clinical activity that's not patient related. It's our partnerships that we have, especially with our pharmacy programs. So we have partnerships with CVS, Walgreens, and then we have a actual new entity, UConn Specialty Pharmacy, that has interactions in this other revenue contracts really related to our pharmacy activity on the clinical side. The next.
Excuse me, do you have Medicaid in here? Medicare, Medicaid, any of that?
So,
in here?
So our Medicaid reimbursement would fall in that net patient revenue category for the 48%.
And Medicare too, same thing?
And Medicare, yes, exactly. So Medicaid is still approximately 25% of our overall activity on the clinical side, and Medicare is actually growing closer to 30%. But those would be both in that blue section of the pie.
Okay.
And can I ask what specifically are you talking about with the the pharmacy? Are you looking at utilization? How are you generating revenue from pharmacy? Is it
So
340B? Is it PBM spread? What is it?
No, you had it right on the head. It's actually the 340B contracts that we do have with the pharmacies. So any of our 340B eligible prescriptions filled by a CVS or a Walgreens, we partner together to ensure that we get that discount, and that discount that the pharmacy captured is sent back over to UConn Health. And then just the additional on that, again, the state support, we can see for the state support, the salary fringe and some of the additional support gets us back to the 26%. And just of note, tuition and fees, as we've mentioned before, is 2%. It's a much smaller aspect on UConn Health than, of course, the main university, and leaves the contracts and research contracts and grants really at 7% for that. That last item, just of note, the interns and residents program at the bottom is for the graduate medical education program. And that's where we run the actual residency program here. Those members that are part of our residency program do travel to the area hospitals in the Hartford area, and we bill and collect for the activities that go through those hospitals. So the next page. Next page, there were a number of questions on just the budget request and where we stand. So again, there's a lot of information here, and I'll go through it quickly and we can have more discussions with it, but we wanted to try to get as much detail back to the committee as we could. So just overall to start with, again, the request was for about $1 billion of state support. And that is, again, in that range of 26% of the total estimated for our fiscal 24 and 25 budgets. With that, the requesting, is to cover the permanent ongoing costs for our CBAC, the collective bargaining increases, and then, of course, the legacy costs, which we've been discussing for a number of years. Just of note, the requests do not include any new asks in there or new items that we haven't been funding in the prior years. So in fiscal 23, again, the request was.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I sort of didn't want to bring this up when you were talking, and we were looking at the budget, and we provided you the one-time the ARPA funds, but you said that you never requested, Jeff, ARPA funds. And having been in the room with Representative Walker, that was not my impression. You asked for permanent funding, and when that was not available, you asked for any other funding available. So I just wanted to say that because I was kind of taken aback when you said you didn't ask or really want ARPA funds, because that was not my impression. And Tony and I had many other places we could have put ARPA funds. We did not have any more general fund dollars for you. So I was really, I really was taken aback that you said that, Jeff, because that was really not my understanding of any discussion that we had.
So I apologize for that, first of all. That was never meant to be that statement. I guess the difference, though, Senator, is our original request and our request now, it maintains the same as it was in 22 through 25. My point of the ARPA funds was we never requested one-time activities that we wanted secured by ARPA funds.
Well, I'm going to remember that, Jeff. So when we're doing this again, I'm going to remember that because I'm never, I just can't see myself doing that. And if I could just finish, every school that I was a first selectman for 12 years, and every time the school came in and they asked for money, they always asked for more money than they really could live with because they never had to cut a program by what we were giving them. And I feel kind of the same way relative to UConn, is you're asking for some dollars. If that, I just want to make sure that what you're saying to me is, if we can't cover all of this in the general fund, which we don't have the money for right now, that you're not saying to me that you don't want any help at all, that you are saying general fund or nothing, and we're not going to appreciate the fact that we're segregating a significant portion of the ARPA funds, which we have over the last 3 years, to deal with COVID and a number of other things that we recognize that you had. So, you know, I didn't want to have a disagreement with you in public relative to the ARPA funds, but I have a completely different impression because just because you give us a request at the beginning of a session does not mean that we have to live up to every one of the dollars that you're asking for. We're going to try to do the best we can, but that is not an obligation. We have a budget that has to comply with a number of requests that we have, and nobody gets all that they want. Nobody. And so I just really, you know, wanted to tell you that, you know, again, I was super disappointed because Tony and I have been working super hard to make sure that you had the funds necessary to be successful over the last few years. And so I just really, I had to say that with, you know, I'm dismayed. I really was. I was so disappointed when you said that. I really was. I thought it was unnecessary, and I thought it was, quite frankly, I thought it was rude. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Austin. I actually appreciate the, you know, the opportunity to give you kind of clarified a statement. I think you're referring to some statements they made. It looks like it's on page 11. We will soon get there. But I would just say that, like, you know, I appreciate all of the work that both the chairs have put in to make sure that our colleges and universities, and all of them, because we did some ARPA distributions as well to the state university and the community colleges. What we're trying to do is try to, insulate as best we can students who are paying the bulk of the costs at UConn for sure, and the substantial part of the cost, you know, at the community college and the CSU system, from the from exorbitant increases in tuition. And that's the spirit in which all of this conversation should, you know, I think is happening. And so I think that when the university, or certainly when I in my subcommittee reports asks for support for the university, it's to prevent substantial tuition increases among students. If we can't provide appropriated dollars from our general fund to do that, then I'm certainly grateful for every additional one-time revenue source that we can find to sort of stop the gap, you know, as a stopgap measure over the biennium for the budget that we're adopting. But that still means that at the end of the 2-year period, we're faced the harsh reality of, you know, how are we going to pay for the system we have without having students incur a 19% increase in their tuition. And so I think we can agree that what we're all trying to do is to provide opportunity at an affordable cost. And with that, I guess, Mr. Gagan, you can continue listening to the additional comments.
Actually, before we do that, I would just like to kind of clarify what you just said there, Representative Haddad. If you can go back one slide, I believe according to what they just put in front of us, tuition is 30%. That is not the lion's share. 100 minus 30 is 70% is being paid for elsewhere. 26% of that is the state of Connecticut. That's 3.6 million people who are paying for the education of these young adults here. So
no, I appreciate the point to give the maybe Jeff Gagan an opportunity of revenue to clarify. When you look at the revenue sources for the university, it's 30% tuition. The 9% fees is also paid for by students, and the auxiliary revenue is also paid for by students. That amounts to 51% of the total revenue stream for the university. Not through me. I guess I can't say through me. You can clarify that if you'd like to, Mr. Gagan.
No, that is correct. So the tuition, obviously the fees, and then room and board again makes up the majority of that auxiliary revenue.
Okay, and that's 51%, which last I checked was more than half. Thank you.
Do we know what it looks like compared to other state colleges and other state schools and other states throughout the country? Is that normal? Is it not normal?
We can actually get you more detailed information on that. No, the state is very generous in their support, and has been for all of the years for UConn. But we can definitely get information on the state support over the years and some comparison to other universities.
Actually, I think maybe if we got that from OFA, maybe we can get that. I don't know if anybody from OFA is on right now, but if we can get the nonpartisan boards to take a look at the state support of UConn compared to other state universities, I'd be very interested to see that. And I'd like it to be broken down by the tuition fees and auxiliary, if that's what we're claiming here is the biggest. Although I would argue that room and board is, room and board, but
On the revenue side for university, for the hospital, how much of that is state support? I'm trying to figure out. State support is 9%, then there's state support 10%.
26. It's 26 total.
That's 26 is for the university.
It's for that also.
Yeah.
9
It
plus
is?
10 is 19 and 7 is 26.
For both,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so it's 26 for both. Interesting.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Great. So Joanne, why don't if we can go to slide 6, yes, perfect. We'll try to get, so just for the difference, and that we have a couple of slides here, I'll just start with the high level for it. The baseline, again, for us is in the gray section, which is one of the first rows. So just the highlight to put the difference between the budget request and the governor's proposed budget. We'll see in that column for fiscal year 24 request. And the first gray columns next to it are the fiscal 24 proposal without the fringe benefit proposal in it. And then you move over 2 more in the dark blue, you'll see is actually the proposal with the fringe benefit. So we'll try to just point out the differences in those two as we walk through. So number one, again, just on the top line, we are thankful and we appreciate that the increase in the baseline, our baseline block grant was there. We're basically in agreement with the proposal. There's a slight difference of 3.4 million. The big difference, as we talked about, are the 2 items, the CBAC permanent support and the legacy cost are the main drivers. But the total appropriation, you'll see in the green in the middle, our request was $615.2 million. The proposal was $459, and that's where the majority of our difference really comes from. So the $156.3 million is there. And then going down, of course, we do get fringe benefits. The current aspect, we get in-kind fringe benefits related to salaries from the baseline and the block grant. So with that added in, the grand total you'll see is a little over $1 billion compared to the proposal of 842. And then that's the 159.6 million that we had mentioned before. So if you follow the same thing over on the dark blue side, a couple more columns over, with the fringe benefit proposal and trying to just use this for just illustrative purposes, you'll see our actual baseline goes down. So that goes down to 325. But if you go down to the in-kind fringe benefit line, the fringe benefit support actually goes up. The grand total stays the same, but again, that's just a movement from the baseline down to the fringe, but our shortfall remains the same with and without the fringe proposal that's in the governor's budget. So just trying to do that. And then at the bottom was just for, again, for illustrative, we were asked about the fund sources. Again, for fiscal 23, there were multiple sources that came in. And I do apologize again if it was not clear, but we are very thankful for all the dollars that we got. The general fund was 731. There were state carry forwards and ARPA funds that was able to get, the funding source just for the request that we had last year, which was the $905 million for that. So if we go to the next slide, and just for informational for the committee, we do have it broken out the same thing for UConn and UConn Health. We'll just point out, or if you go back one, Joanne, just in the grand total line, just for everybody's knowledge there, UConn, the difference is about 84.6 million. And then on the next slide, the portion that's related to UConn Health is 75 million. So if we go to the next slide, so on the shortfall, again, we're just trying for just the difference. The baseline has been increasing and goes. The difference really is that red and the green, which again is just the legacy cost and the CBAC agreements. And you can see there's some slight one-time other funds on there. But the difference from that is really just that compared to the governor's proposal, which had the baseline and then some additional one-time funds through ARPA of the 73.6. Again, just the calculation, that main driver is those difference in the operating funds of 156.3 for 24, and that's 195.6 on 25. So the next slide. And just for the growth, we're thankful for the governor and the legislature. We can see by the blue line, our baseline appropriation has increased every year since starting in fiscal year 20. So it's there. The red and the green are the two items that are kind of increasing on top of that baseline. So next slide. So on this was the ARPA conversation. So just the funds that we received in the ongoing. So, and again, this is just one of the things I guess I have to apologize. I'll try to explain. Our request is always based on basically the cash flow shortage that we have. And again, last year, we are thankful for every dollar that we get. And if I did not convey that, I apologize. But last year, we did receive ARPA funds to help that cash shortfall. So again, we have utilized those and understand we've worked with OPM and the guidance to make sure that we have used those for the allowable costs as we continue to do for that. So that is one of those aspects that we understand what those funds are for in 23, and we're making sure we're utilizing those appropriately. So next slide. So how we utilize them, we just gave some of the aspects that we're using. So they're, first of all, I guess we have committed in our current budget to, we project to utilize all of the funds. So we don't have any unspent funds that we believe we're going to be able to roll forward into fiscal 24. So there you'll just see stores and UConn Health. So for stores, we have a couple of different areas though. One of the main ones was for facilities and our university safety around the main campus. We also did use a small portion for housing and dining for the current year. And then there was $1 million for a social media impact study and the Puerto Rican initiative that we had. Again, that will be projected to be spent by fiscal 24. And then for UConn Health, the support went directly to our multi-specialty physician practice, basically to support patient access and the needs throughout the state without reducing or eliminating any programs for that year. The ARPA allowed us to continue access to all of our multi-specialty group for the University Medical Group or UMG. Next slide. Next was about the discussion of combining the block grants. Again, with the combining of the block grants, a couple of items came up. One was the One Yukon model for that. So we do have a couple of notes. We've been practicing the One Yukon for a number of years now. We have some examples down here that we were able to do some items cross campus. That includes university safety, some of our research activities, and compliance. So as we continue to focus on that, we will, we have a commitment to continue to do that regardless of combining or not combining, the overall block grants. We just had the one item there that, for if the combination can create that scenario where if UConn and or UConn Health, vice versa, but was ever urged to use funds that were generated at stores of the regionals to fund the health center, or in the exact opposite of funds wherever at the health center to go back over to the stores in regional. So just looking for the aspect of those funds in separate line items or separate tracking the way that they currently are is our suggestion back to the legislature. Next page. So the fringe impact proposal, and again, I kind of went through it quickly on the numbers, but just in the high level, the current proposal, as we calculate it, the amount that the state would cover for fringe benefits would increase by around $60 million. But as we pointed out, it actually simultaneously reduces the block grant or decreases the block grant portion by the same $60 million, which creates that budget neutral aspect. So we do agree, especially for the university and the health center, the positive impact of this would definitely be as it could relate to being more competitive for federal research grants. But it does not have over the overall benefit of providing relief as originally requested for that. So we just note that the shortfall remains the same with or without the fringe benefit proposal as it stated. So next slide, Joanne. So and just for the numbers, we tried to just walk it through. So at the bottom is a table. So the current method, again, in the orange part is the state. So currently the state pays all fringe benefit costs for state employees on the block grant, which you can see adds up to about $359.4 million. And then moving to the proposed, basically the state would pay the retirement portion of all employees. And then the other portion, the non-retirement portion, would be picked up by the university. So again, this just illustrates that the state portion would go up, and our calculation on that is about $60.4 million. And that's the same amount, again, would be reduced in the block grant. And page 60.
Mr. Daniels, yeah. Could you go back to that other slide? I was trying to, could you go back? So currently we're paying $359 and the university is paying $313. The proposed is the state pay $419 and you pay $253.
Correct, for just the fringe portions, yes.
Okay.
Next slide, Joanne. So again, for just UConn, one of the questions were what could be the effect for tuition and enrollment. So I'll just take the first bullet just for tuition. Again, this is just for illustrative purposes only. If we had to actually cover the difference with students and tuition, what would that mean? And that's about a $3,000 increase for the undergrad and grad students, which comes to that close to 19% increase for in-state undergraduates for that calculation. And then go through some of the other enrollment and some other information. I'm going to turn it over to Nathan to take you through the next couple of slides.
Great, thanks.
Actually, I'm sorry, before you do that, Are you telling me that the absolute only thing you could do would be to raise tuition?
No, this is just an illustrated proposal of what it would do for tuition. There are a multitude of items that we would have to focus on, not only increasing revenues, but also decreasing costs.
I'd like to understand that, because the rhetoric is, if the state doesn't give us the money that everybody knew wasn't going to continue, we're going to have to raise tuition by 20%. The sky is falling. Dogs and cats are getting married, et cetera, et cetera. So I would like to understand all of the different options that UConn has, whether it is reviewing the programs that you have, looking at class size, at making optimizations, what is out there besides this media grabbing 3,000 tuition increase per undergraduate and grad student.
And I think we're going to go through some of those here, but we'd be happy to provide you with any other additionals also.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the other questions was, what would happen if we were to increase out-of-state enrollment? If you could just back up real quick, by around 3,700 students while decreasing in-state students. The impact, of course, would be that we would admit quite a few fewer in-state students, and our residency mix would go from 72% to 57%. One thing that I like to underscore is that we replace 25% of our students every year, right? Because we bring in a class and graduate a class every year. So for us to make significant shifts in residency actually takes time. It's not something that a university anywhere would typically do over a single year period of time. Next slide, please. One of the questions that we received was about the economic mobility of our students. In fact, our students do very, very well on this front. Our students have an average starting salary of $59,000, almost $60,000 a year, which is above the national average. In a recent external study, we were ranked number 13 in terms of the social mobility of our students. In fact, 47% of our students have, excuse me, let me say that differently. Our lowest income students have a 47% chance of moving to the highest income quintile, which is a really phenomenal thing, right? Where students come in and they get their college degree and then move their family income to that high of a level. There's a bunch of stats there. I'm not going to cover them all. I think you have them to digest and can ask for additional information. Happy to provide it. Next slide. So we also were asked about our in-state residency percentage, as well as, I want to say, the tuition rates. And so I'll start from left to right on this page. You'll note that when we look at our competitors, we've noted our out-of-state as well as our in-state rate. These are actually the schools that we go head-to-head with quite aggressively in some instances for the top students, and many of those, of course, from the state of Connecticut. The next chart over shows you the in-state tuition rate as it compares to other state flagship universities. And this is something that we're increasingly sensitive to and keeping our eye on as it relates to affordability. And the idea or prospect of increasing tuition is something that we're cautious about. And in fact, it's something that our team models and looks at very carefully. For practically every dollar of tuition increase that we impose, we see some degradation of demand, not just on the part of out-of-state students, but in-state students as well. And then on the far right, you have a table that shows the percent of in-state students of our undergraduate students compared to other flagship universities. So on the whole, actually, we do quite well compared to other states in terms of the percent of in-state students. Next slide. There was a question about what's happened to our enrollment and the demographics over the last 10 years. And so first of all, we've grown our undergraduate enrollment by about 6%. A lot of that at the regional campuses that have grown by about 16% over the 10-year period. And for our Stores campus alone, 5%. It's noted that a lot of that growth has come on the part of international students as we've emerged as a global university and continue to attract the attention of students from around the world. Importantly, though, is the mix of those students. And so we absolutely want to continue to do a better job serving our first generation students. We've been doing so. We've increased by 11 percentage points on that front. We've increased 4 percentage points for Pell recipients. Some of the biggest progress that we've actually made over the past 10 years or so is increasing by 12 percentage points for underrepresented minority students. And a little bit more granular detail is offered up there where our Hispanic Latinx enrollment has more than doubled over that period of time. Black student enrollment has grown by 42%. That's significant, and we're proud of that. And we want to continue that progress that we have seen in keeping the best and brightest and most diverse students here. Next slide, I think, is back to Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Nathan. And then the last one was just a question about the Excel Center. Again, so specifically with the costs and then any revenue gain associated with the games. So we just put down some of the information there, though, and currently at the bottom you'll just see the graph, just the CRDA. So our current, cost related to basically playing at the XL with CRDA is about the $1.5 million. But overall, there is a net revenue gain depending on, really, it's the number of tickets sold for each one. And then, of course, the number of games that we actually do play. But there is an average of about 283,000 for basketball games played at the XL Center. With that, Mr. Chair, that actually ends all of our slides, and be happy to open it up to questions.
Can I, very quickly, that slide you had us on was 283,000 per game?
Correct. So that's the basically that's the amounts after we did an estimate of the cost. So that would be that gain per game for just playing at the XL Center.
So it'd be kind of counterintuitive to actually to say we're not going to play games there, right? Because that would be an even bigger hit to your revenue if you were not to engage there.
The aspect is if we actually played at Gample or on campus, we might be able to make even more gain per each game because we wouldn't have that associated rental and other expenses with that.
You'd have significantly less seats though, correct? The Gamble doesn't hold nearly as much as the XL Center.
Exactly. There would be a difference related on it's all related really to the number of tickets.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Just, I actually think that, we focused a lot of attention on the Excel Center. I don't want to add to that, but the Gamble Pavilion is your facility. You realize all parking revenue, all concession revenue, all ticket revenue. That's not true at Excel, where you also have to pay for rent, right? And so I think that what the president was trying to say, and I actually appreciate her saying it, even if I think that we can all sort of stipulate that we will, UConn will continue to play games in Hartford. That her focus is on academics, and that if there are things to be trimmed, these are kind of the choices that we're left with, and that's in the spirit of some of the other questions that Representative Nuccio and others asked, which is like, how can you make up a shortfall of $100 million or $150 million if it's not if not through if not through sort of additional revenue, how do you trim that much money from your budget? It seems to represent a significant portion of your overall budget. It's 10% maybe.
Correct.
But yeah, I guess I sort of said that as a statement, but I see Senator Hartley has her hand up, and it's a good time to just move through questions from other members of the committee. Senator Hartley, what is your question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, with regard to the XL Center, I'm wondering what the agreement is. Is it a negotiated agreement? And when, if so, it was last negotiated with regard to, surcharges and rental expense? What's the agreement there?
So it is a negotiated agreement that we have with CRDA. I don't know the details of when it was last negotiated or the term, but we can definitely get that information for you.
Yeah, and how frequently is it reviewed? And yeah, that would be helpful to know. I think there's a benefit in all candor for both parties, which makes for a good negotiation.
And as the chair mentioned also, there is no intention to actually stop or, not play at the XL Center. It's just that it's just one of those things that was mentioned before. I think that got a lot of coverage, but there's no intention currently.
No, I hear you. And that's why I'm wondering, what these agreements are. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I have a couple of small ones as we went through. Can you tell me what the current value of your endowment is and how much that endowment yields in operating support on an annual basis?
So the current endowment is close to $600 million. And our current budget that we do pull off from the foundation is, around $26 to $29 million a year for ongoing support.
Right, because most of the endowment is held, of course, and you're distributing to the university in terms of operating support only a small amount. That the money is also restricted sometimes to specific uses.
Exactly correct. So the endowment is to be held in perpetuity and not to be spent. It's the earnings off the endowment that the foundation has a spending plan that is spent over. And then there are certain ones for endowed chairs or specific scholarships or certain items, but most of the endowment does have restrictions on what those spending purposes are.
Right. I wanted to note that, I guess, in particular, because, that endowment, $600 million, is a significant increase over just a few years ago, when I think we were talking about something closer to 300 million. I think probably in the last 10 years or so, it's safe to say, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, is that your endowment has doubled. It is not nearly where we need to be. I think the University of Michigan is somewhere around, it's measured in several billion dollars. I mean, I wouldn't say $10 billion, give or take a couple billion. I don't know what it is right now, but just another way that, you kind of working hard to catch up. I raise that as an issue just because that was one of the strategies that the governor had suggested for making up the $150 million. And it's sort of an interesting suggestion, given that I don't think the university has left any money on the table. I don't think that you're gonna, anyone could argue that you haven't been working hard to increase your endowment as much as possible over the last 10 years. And yet, I don't know what more we could do if there's an incremental improvement. But I will ask the question, I mean, are there things that the state can do that would help you increase your fundraising capacity at the university to significantly increase your endowment enough to make a difference? If not in this biennium, maybe sometime soon.
So, and with that, the actual president does have a goal to get the endowment up to $1 billion. They're actually meeting next week with the board of the UConn Foundation. And we can actually propose that also if there are any strategies also. The endowment is fully aware of that and working towards that goal to do that. So we are in full agreement with that item that was put into the budget and that the governor had mentioned, that is a focus. And of course, that is one of the goals, to make sure that we increase that and get additional dollars, operating dollars in.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go, I guess, just follow up on Representative Nuccio's question. Is it possible for you to paint us a picture of what you would need to do if you were to have to reduce overall expenditures at stores and your branch campuses by, I don't know, I'll ask an arbitrary number, $60 million or $80 million?
So with that, the majority of our expenditures, of course, are salary and fringe benefits related to our personnel. Such a dramatic dollar amount or material dollar amount like that would have to be into looking at using less personnel across all campuses for that. Related to being able to do that in 1 year, I don't even know if that is possible, especially related with all our contracts. We deal with, I know at UConn Health, we deal with 9 different unions over here. So we have multiple contracts and multiple things we would have to look at. But those reductions would come in with also a review if we didn't have the faculty and the staff. It would have to also be a reduction in services for classes and clinical and other things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question to answer, I guess, but I guess that's one that seems to be on the mind of some folks here. And I certainly appreciate that, once you enunciate a plan like that, it gets to be sort of an issue of itself, but we'll see. So Senator Flexer, I see your hand up. Perhaps you have a question.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for your presentation this afternoon. I guess I just have one comment and then a question. I don't think you can quantify this, so this is why it's a comment and not a question, but I think I want to make sure not lost in this conversation is some of the intangible benefits that any state gets from its flagship university, but particularly here in Connecticut, what a point of pride the university is for so many different reasons for our state, especially in a place like Connecticut, where for many reasons, just UConn is a point of cohesion for us. And I'm a little biased, but I think, that's sometimes hard to quantify. And I hope that doesn't get lost in some of these difficult conversations that UConn is just so important, I think, to why people are proud to live in Connecticut. And my question is the slide that you shared about with some of the other state flagship universities and the tuition levels. I wonder if you might be able to overlay, I'm sure you can't do it right now, but I'd be curious to see those institutions that you showed us as tuition examples. What's the corresponding state support that they get? And how is what we're at, what we've been at, how does our level compare with those? If you can't answer that off the top of your head, that'd be great, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, we'd have to get that information and bring it back.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fletcher. Representative Nuccio, you had some follow-up questions as well.
I always have questions. It's just built into my nature. So I would like to also understand why your expenses went up so high. Like why, what's happened? Where have we gotten from in the last couple of years when you were using the COVID money for ongoing expenses? So what drove that and why it changed? Because obviously the block grant prior to all of this was what you were getting and it was all maintainable. So now we're at the point where, we've jumped from not only what you were getting before, the highest amount of block grant that you're getting now, but the desire for $1 billion. So I'd like to understand what's changed in your expense model that has brought us to the point that UConn needs $1 billion from the taxpayers.
So, and we will definitely get you more detail, but both on UConn and UConn Health, the aspect, and especially over the past decade, we've been growing. We've been adding positions to cover the increase in students. And Nathan can go into it, but this year is our highest incoming class and number of students we've had in our history. And the same thing on UConn Health. We've actually doubled the clinical enterprise over the past decade, which comes with hiring the faculty, the physicians, the nursing, and all of the other staff to do it. So again, those expenses have been increasing, but have been the overall plan also with the increase that we've seen in both education and the clinical side.
So to me, as an accountant, looking at that, if you're adding that, then I guess I just don't see the reasonableness of saying we're going to increase the need. And maybe we can take a look at this, but if any of my research is right, I think UConn professors are in the top 10 highest paid professors in the state of Connecticut. I mean, in the country for public universities. But if we're increasing the amount of students that we have there, and that's increasing the cost, but you're not in, I don't understand the correlation between that means you need more state funding rather than reevaluating the actual cost of what it takes to get a degree from UConn. So I guess that's where I don't know. I think there's more research to be done here. If you're increasing just the expenses and not the revenue side and hoping that the state is going to fill in the revenue side, I think that's kind of lopsided. So I would be interested to see the breakdown of your expense increase for like the last 6 years or so, just to kind of see that compared to the block grant and the money that the state has given.
We definitely can do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, it was, it's ancient history now, but when I was on campus, I think you had half the number of students that you currently have. And in a state where, so many employers are begging us for additional skilled workforce, I think it's, I don't know how you ignore demand for, let's say, engineers, for example. You produce half the engineering degrees in the state of Connecticut with it's something. So it's a complicated. I appreciate Representative Nuccia's question. I think it's also a complicated answer because I wonder where we would be in the state if we don't have a workforce that is capable of supporting the business community in the state. So that has a cost to it too. I guess inaction in this case, not growing the size of the university has an impact as well. Representative Dathan, I see you have a question.
Thank you so much. Just to clarify, the revenue from the endowment, is that in the line item other or in the baseline, or is that, in the fund sources, is that in the general fund?
No, it's in the other revenue line item for both UConn and UConn Health.
Okay, so that's helpful. Secondly, just thinking about sort of cost on a fixed versus variable basis in terms of contractual spend, I'm wondering if I can take Rep. Nuccia's request and just make it a little bit more comprehensive, where we look at the expenses in terms of personnel costs by sort of contractual, looking at what's under CBAC, what the agreement is. And I understand that predominantly most of the staff are under CBAC, so there's a very few amount that would be considered sort of variable and more part-time workers. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, most of our staff, especially our full-time staff, are covered by either AAP for our faculty union. So all of our physicians and our faculty are in there. And then all other representative staff, again, we have multiple different ones, but we can do that by category also.
Yeah, and then also just kind of highlighting what are some of the other sort of variable expenses. So in variable, I would count things like, and I'm not suggesting that they're not important, but things like marketing spend, maybe technology spend. And then under the sort of fixed nature, just think about things like rent, any sort of agreements on those sort of things. If you could, that might get a better understanding of, the sort of natures of the spend, because, the information, I was really thankful of all the information, Jeffrey, that you put together on where Connecticut sits compared to other universities in terms of sort of tuition. And that's, we're right where we should be. So I'm not going to keep going on because I know we're always pressed for time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, UConn, for your presentation today.
Senator Hartley, you had another question.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second time. I'll be very brief. So thank you for the comprehensive package. So I'm seeing here that one bullet is talking about FY24 difference in the request for what is requested versus what was in the governor's budget is about $160 million. And then it's about 197 and 25. Can you tell me, how does the CBI, the recently, the collective bargaining changes factor into that 159.6? What proportion of that delta is reflected by those CBI increases?
And so I don't know, Joanne, if you want to bring up the page 6 again, if you can. But in the on page 6 of the handout that we did send over, you'll see there is a specific line item. And again, the 159 is broken into a lot of different aspects, but most of it is that total appropriation here in the green line and above is 156, and that's where it's made of. So that CBAC portion that you were talking about, what we did, again, this is just illustrative, not meant to convey intent, but we took the proposed ARPA funds in the governor's budget and just put that against the difference of the CBAC. But you could see that the request is 114.6 million. And if you take that ARPA fund and offset that, then that difference would be $41 million. I don't know if that's the true intent at all. We just have that for illustration, but it's really that line for your question of the 114.6.
Yeah, this graph is very helpful because in the past, our delta was always about the legacy costs. And yes, you have been growing, and that's really important to us. So now we're dealing with legacy costs, but also this new advent or this new start of the recent CBI on the contracts. So those coming together, this is helpful for us to break down where that $160 million delta is coming from. I thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Additionally, it's just a follow-up on the fringe costs, and we were talking about cost drivers. We can talk about it simply in terms of legacy costs, but I'll just talk about differently in terms of the fringe costs. Not that are supported for block granted employees, but you're required to pay the fringe cost for all employees that are not paid for under the current rubric, right? By appropriated funds, by our block granted funds. Would you be able to provide to us, the value of those payments? And I understand it's sort of back and forth. Like, I'm never sure if you're actually cutting a check to the comptroller's office or if they're just taking it off your block grant. But I want to know, like, how much of an increase have you realized in over the last, 5 or maybe 10 years? We weren't paying those costs as a state 10 years ago. But as we've begun to pay off our unfunded pension liability, the fringe rate has increased dramatically. I guess what I'm asking you for is, what do those payments look like that you're responsible for paying for non-block granted employees over a 10-year period?
So, and I think actually, if I can just combine that maybe with Representative Nuccio's proposal, maybe we'll go back 10 years for those expenses, because that'll be part of salaries, how salaries increased per FTEs, fringe, how fringe increased per FTE. And we can provide that in that detail to give you that kind of timeline on those expenses. But you are correct. The increase in the overall fringe rates are part of that expense increase over that time.
Yeah, I mean, the CSU system, I suspect the same is true for you, but the CSU system provided a chart that basically indicated that the increase in the fringe rate is a driver for nearly all of the increase that they've had. That the state funding for operating expenses has actually remained quite flat. That all of the increase that we provided them is for fringe support. I asked them for the same for a chart, like just to sort of see over time you know, what your costs are, what your portion of those costs are, and that's what you're passing along to, you know, your other revenue streams, you know, tuition, and the stuff that's the stuff that students pay for, but also the stuff that, that gets paid for out of research grants. But over time, I think we'll see that that's a pretty steep increase over the last 10 years, and that it's a significant cost driver for your overall budget. Representative Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can we just go back to that other slide that we just had? I think it was page 4, where it says UConn budget request. I'm trying to make out some of the information that's up there.
Page 6, I think.
It's the one that we just had up.
Yeah.
Okay. So it says FY24 without FB. What's FB?
The fringe benefit proposal. From
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So the first request, the first part is the request from you guys. The second part is the fringe benefit without the fringe, and then the shortfall is incorporating the fringe. And that this is the new fringe, or is this the total fringe?
So the first one in the light gray section is just illustrative of if the governor's fringe proposal, that's the new fringe proposal, wasn't taken into consideration. The aspect there is that the baseline goes up very close to what we projected, and that's there. But if you look at the details of the governor's budget, it looks like the baseline's going down, but that's not in fact the case. The reason it's going down is because the fringe is going up, but the total amount of the governor's budget stays the same regardless of with or without the fringe benefit proposal.
I'm confused. With the governor's proposal, it stays the same.
So if you go down to the light blue line, I'll try to do that. That says grand total.
Yep.
Without the fringe benefits new proposal, under the current methodology, the governor's proposed budget is that $842 million of support.
Okay.
Now, if you move over to with the fringe benefit proposal, you'll see the grand total stays the same. The proposal just has less block grant, less total appropriation, and more fringe benefit coverage. So it's just a view of, depending on which way you're looking at it, but it's just to illustrate the difference of what you would see with and without the proposal. But the bottom line, the total dollar amount stays the same.
So the legacy cost is what we've been talking about all along. And the addition of the CBAC of the 41, plus what's the other? What's the 3.2? I don't, what's that?
And then the other, we do have a number of smaller items that were in the budget that we just rolled forward. And I don't have all of the details, but it was the Circa. There was a vet plan that was in there. The green snow project was in there. Well, I can get you all of those details too. We have that, but it's a number of small identified items that have been rolling forward.
But the discussion that we've been having for the last few years is the legacy cost.
Correct.
But this year, you've added in the CBAC cost as a problem.
Correct. So Joanne, if you go down maybe 4 slides
Go down.
on page 10. So this was just trying to illustrate that exact point. So starting in fiscal 20, we actually started to receive dollar amounts to help offset the legacy cost.
Yeah.
So in those 2 years, it was just the baseline block grant and then the legacy cost. And then starting in fiscal 22 for the new CBAC agreement, just started the additional of that CBAC line for there. So just rolling forward, we were trying to illustrate the legacy cost, the baseline legacy cost, and then that new fiscal 22 CBAC agreement.
Okay. If we didn't have the CBAC, that would be a sizable amount of money. Okay. Okay, doesn't change. The numbers are still there. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Oh, Senator Austin.
Thank you very much. I also have a question. Did you have anybody that sat at the table during the CBAC conversations?
No, we were not at part of the negotiating table for the statewide CBAC.
Not at part of it, but you were at part of the discussions. Somebody had to be a part of the discussions. You mean they discussed for UConn and none of you were ever there during any of the...
As far as I know, I can get you that information, but I don't believe we were part of any of those.
Yeah, because as far as I know, having actually been part of those negotiations, they always had management weigh in on all of the discussions relative to that. And I would be shocked that you had never had anybody involved in the negotiations. And if you didn't, did you let your position know? Did you when the legislature was calling about the CBAC agreement, did you say that you did not approve of this contract ever?
Yeah. So yeah, to make sure we answer correctly, I'll have to go back, but we'll get our labor relation team to get all of that detail to you.
Okay, because I happen to be the one that sort of brings them out on the floor, and I didn't have management in any organization or part of state government that was opposed to the CBAC agreement. So I would just be interested if you were opposed to the CBAC agreement when it came before the legislature. And then let me know if anybody was sitting at the table during any of them or sitting off to the side, because sometimes you might not be at the exact table, but you're acting as backup in a separate room. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Austin. Are there any additional questions? Going once?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I have one. The CBAC piece of that graph, is that the full cost of all of the professors of CBAC or just the ones covered by the block grant?
No, that's the full cost of the CBAC agreement.
So why would we be looking to cover the full cost of the CBAC if 40 something percent, what is it? How many percent of your professors, 49% of your professors are paid for with tuition? Then why would we be expecting the state to cover the entire CBAC uptick and not the portion that's just covered by the block grant?
Again, when that was going forward, our request was, we understand the increase, but not to pass it on to students and having that discussion up front, like we were covered in 22 and 23, that those increases, just that portion covered by the state.
See, I guess that's just where fundamentally, again, I'm going to have to get back to disagree. This is the cost of getting an education at that school. If we're giving the professors and everybody an increase, the cost. So if 60% is 50% is being paid for by the state and 50% is being paid for by tuition, I think it's really just I guess non-government world jobs. Like, I just don't understand the assumption that the taxpayer should pay for all of that. But that's interesting. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're not prepared to have a debate. We'll have a debate at some point later, but I think the reason that we have a public university is to subsidize the cost of a quality public higher education. How much that subsidy should be, I think, is the question that we are attempting to answer now. And when there are external agreements that are negotiated and those costs are passed along, I think it is a fair moment to ask ourselves, what is the appropriate level of subsidy? And are we achieving our goal of ensuring that there's a quality education? We have a top 25 flagship university. We have to decide whether or not that is a goal that we want to maintain, or if we want to do things like reduce the number of, the student to faculty ratio, or if we want to, leave the university in a position where they have to increase tuition rates significantly, which has a lot of impacts, I think, on their mix. It impacts how what students are attracted in and from where. So I think all of those questions, I think, are wrapped up into this question. I continue to think of this as being a question from the perspective of students and families in Connecticut that depend on the University of Connecticut to get that quality education. They're taxpayers too. And there's a balance between what we, of course, and limitations on what we can expect taxpayers to support for a public university and what we expect families in Connecticut to pay for it. And that I think it's all a mix. I'm not sure it's quite so linear as you proposed it, but I think it's certainly an undercurrent to all of our conversations. Are there any additional questions? I don't see any, so thank you very much. I trust that you will follow up with us with a number of the questions that we asked and posed, and we appreciate that. I don't know that we have any additional work sessions scheduled as a subcommittee, so the next time we meet, we are likely to begin to sort of hash through some of the information that we've got and try to make our best recommendations to the chairs of the committee so that they can put together a budget that works for everybody. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.